What's up guys, Metallic Rock here. Now that I've completed all the dungeons on Mythic difficulty, I've decided to use tier list to kind of rank them. Not like a real S tier, A tier, B tier rank. Just which ones I thought were really good dungeons, or okay dungeons, or bad dungeons. As a hint, there's no bad dungeons in my mind. This isn't really like a what dungeons are best, just a what dungeons did I like. So it's literally personal preference. We're going to be doing this in the order of the zones that you see. Each zone has 2 dungeons. You go through Bastion, Maldraxxus, Ardenweald, and then Revendreth. The first dungeon from Bastion would be Spires of Ascension. Spires of Ascension was a pretty fun dungeon actually. There's a lot of bosses that have like bullet hell elements that kind of kicked my ass, but I thought were really fun. The final boss is a really fun one-shot mechanic that always reminds me of the Shatter from Stonecore in Cataclysm, and I thought it was a really good dungeon. I would put it at the good section. I had a lot of fun with it. It didn't feel impossible, or it felt fair but difficult, which I think is the perfect balance level for a Mythic dungeon on the opening week. We had a couple wipes on the last boss due to my brain just kind of short-circuiting. But other than that, it was a really smooth dungeon with the group I had. And all these dungeons I did with pug groups. The next dungeon inside Bastion is the Necrotic Wake. It's a sort of Maldraxxus themed dungeon that you have inside Bastion due to story reasons that I won't spoil here in case you haven't finished playing the story. It is only opening week after all. It was a good dungeon. I think the trash is minimal. There's a couple trash packs that hit really hard. As a Brewmaster tank, there's a lot of magic damage that if it doesn't get kicked, it kind of ate my ass. But other than that, it was pretty smooth, and it's decently thematic. It is a little bit sucky for Bastion that they only get 1 Bastion-themed dungeon, and there are 3 Maldraxxus-themed dungeons. But other than that, I think that it's a great dungeon. The third boss has a really cool mechanic where you have to hook him down using the ads. That is going to be a pug nightmare, but I think is really fun and clever. The last boss has some pretty hard hitting mechanics if you aren't paying attention and choose to stand still. But other than that, the dungeon's pretty smooth, the mechanics are pretty easy to work around, and it's definitely pretty fun. The next dungeon is Plaguefall. This is the first dungeon from the Maldraxxus area. And it's okay. It's an okay dungeon. Personally, it wasn't my favorite. There's nothing like mediocre or bad about it, right? It was what it was. It was a Maldraxxus themed dungeon. I don't think it was as good as the Necrotic Wake. The bosses are fine. I'd say not super memorable. The last boss has some pretty cool mechanics where you have to dodge tentacles that come up in certain orders, but other than that, the dungeon was just alright. The next dungeon from the Maldraxxus area is Theater of Pain, and I would also say that this dungeon is okay. Neither of these dungeons blew me away. It's not necessarily the Maldraxxus theme of them. I thought Maldraxxus was a really cool zone. I know a lot of people have expressed displeasure, at least in my inner circle, with Maldraxxus. The storyline being too long and it just being full of skeletons and disgustingness. But I thought Maldraxxus was a pretty neat area with the theming of like fighting, and Theater of Pain being a warrior, having to fight for any kind of recognition or power. Theater of Pain is a perfect encapsulation of that ideal behind Maldraxxus. And in that sense, it's a good dungeon thematically. It's very good. But the dungeon in itself was just okay. The bosses were pretty cool. There's a boss with mechanics where hooks sweep across and you have to dodge them. The first boss isn't really memorable for me on Mythic even. It sort of didn't have mechanics. It just kind of bleeds together. There's a section where you do some portal hopping that's pretty cool, but other than that, I'd say it's just an okay dungeon. For the next 2 dungeons, it's time to finally get into the Ardenweald dungeons. And this is where possibly my Night Fae bias is going to come in, as I've chosen the Night Fae Covenant for my Brewmaster. Well, let's start off with the other side, which I will say is a pretty great dungeon. I think it's excellent. It's you know, Bwansamdi is a fan favorite. It's great to see him back in play. Getting that backstory between him and Mozala being his boss. Mozala being the one who whispered that Sylvanas should be the war chief. You get to see a Night Fae-like area for one boss, a Gnomish Mechagon-like area for one boss, and then you get to journey all the way back to Hakar and kind of relive some of those old vibes. I think the dungeon is super cool for a lot of players. I think they'll really enjoy this one. The boss mechanics themselves, outside of theme, are fun. I thought they were fine. The first boss has a trap mechanic where you have to utilize them at the right times. With the mana storms, you have to use them against each other, or for the meta achievement for Mythic, not use them against each other, which I accidentally got my first time around in Mythic, but that's another story. And then for Hakar, it's a pretty standard, pretty standard boss fight. Mozala's boss fight, I think, is going to be memorable for everyone on their first time. Both on normal, heroic, and mythic. I've seen my entire group get one shot the first time around. The first time I stepped into the dungeon, I got one shot by the mechanic where Bwansamdi comes to save you. If you don't take the portal, you die. I always let everybody die once. I feel like it's part of the other side experience. Your first time is one free death. But the dungeon, I think, is just great. And then, obviously, I'm going to jump right into Tirna Scythe, which is, I think, another great dungeon. Aesthetically, I think the design of the two Ardenweald dungeons were nailed perfectly. I really like the atmosphere the dungeons provide. The trash fights are interesting, mildly interesting. The bosses are fun to play against. Mistcaller is already a famous or infamous encounter, both in the puzzle you play to get to her and the puzzle you play on her. It's another one of those pain points for pugs. Anyone can walk through random mists and reset the whole group back to the beginning, but I think it's a fun mini-game to play that is a little bit rewarding and challenging at the same time. Not super challenging, and I'm sure we'll optimize our way out of it with weak auras or with mathematical patterns that appear that we can just, check the first shape, and then we'll know which shape is the correct one just off of one check using pattern recognition. But as of right now, I think it's a really fun dungeon, even if it's a bit of a headache right now for some people. For the next two dungeons, we're going to be moving on to Revendreth, and we're going to be starting with Halls of Atonement. Halls of Atonement is another one of those dungeons where it's pretty good, but it's only okay to good. I will say that it's good. This was probably the easiest Mythic dungeon I did this week. Either I had a really great pug group, or the boss's mechanics are almost negligible or extremely easy to counteract. The courtyard clearing is fun, but it takes a while. But after that, it's like boss, boss, boss. Like, pretty much back to back with very little trash packs in between. The boss encounters are fun with pretty simple mechanics to follow that are medium punishing. They're not mega punishing. I didn't get one shot on any of the bosses, and it was my first time around, and I think I failed to follow several mechanics. So it's not, similar to Spires of Ascension, where if you don't follow the mechanics, you will die, or the other side, where you will die. You can heal through it, or mitigate through it, or whatever you need to do. But it wasn't like a super memorable dungeon. It was still fun. If you're a Revendreth player, or a Venthyr player, I should say, there are gargoyles that you can control in the courtyard area to help you. And that's really cool to me. I thought that was amazing when I had saw that. I really like that they included that kind of touch for the covenants and having specific benefits in different dungeons. I thought that was a really good touch. Which will bring us to the last dungeon, Sanguine Depths, which I'm going to say is an okay dungeon. Sanguine Depths is the dungeon where my legendary power comes out of as a Brewmaster Monk, so I should be well acquainted with it shortly. I haven't gotten my power yet. I've been getting a lot of Auspex conduits. Anybody else? Sanguine Depths is another pretty simple dungeon. It's one of the hallways, tight corridors dungeon, which typically in the past I haven't enjoyed that much, but I think in this case it's not so bad. It's not like Toldagor, I haven't had any bugs where mobs are hitting me through the floor while I'm fighting bosses, so that's a plus. Hopefully they've learned their lesson. Sanguine Depths, as it is in the name, is a dungeon with Sanguine every week, basically. Mobs drop blood pools on the ground, depending, certain mobs drop blood pools on the ground at different parts of the dungeon. The bosses are pretty interesting and exciting. I like at one point you just pick up a Naru and decide to use it as a shield. Seems a little bit sacrilegious, but who am I to judge? All in all, it's a good dungeon, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed this small analysis or anecdotes of Mythic Shadowlands dungeons. Let me know your experiences in dungeons of any level if you've done them, Mythic dungeons as well. I'd love to know what you guys think about the dungeons and how you feel they fit into your life. How do you feel these dungeons are going to hold up in the next 2 years? Hopefully stick around and maybe I can come back in 2 years and do a recap on how I feel about these dungeons, the so-called pug killers, when after 2 years people are still not hooking the boss on the Necrotic Wake. That'll be exciting to see. I hope you guys have a great day and a great start to your week. This has been Metallic Rock, and I'll see you guys real soon.